I love that we've gotten to George McLeod because it feels like we're approaching us. He's dealing with some things that we're dealing with. Not that people before him did deal some with nonviolence and try to struggle with all of that. But that's becoming more and more an issue as we progress along. And I think that's a great thing for us to progress along about. I want to start off with one of his prayers. Almighty God, the morning is yours, rising into fullness. The summer is yours, dipping into autumn. Eternity is yours, dipping into time. The vibrant grasses, the scent of flowers, the lichen on the rocks, the tang of seaweed, all are yours. Gladly we live in this garden of your creating, yet in the garden also, always the thorn. In the garden that is each of us, always the thorn. What
I worked on each day as two pages sometimes.
So what came out of this chapter for you? What did you want to talk about?
I was curious as to thinking about what the definition of matter is.
That's a good question, isn't it?
And so I went to Mr. Webster, and the first was what a thing is made of, material.
Yeah.
But the second, whatever occupies space and is perceptible to the senses.
Interesting. You know, the difficulty is that I think in theological circles, oftentimes matter has been defined as anything I want to not like, right? And put a negative on, right? And that's what I think is fighting about, is that all that stuff, which has often been called not God, not right, not good, not what, you know, that which draws us into heaven, that's matter, it's earthly, and he's trying to say, no, that's not a good distinction. That matter is important. Matter matters, as he says.
He was so far ahead in the hippie movement to me. But he just wanted things so, he just wanted laid back. And that's the way he wanted life to be. Now there's some, you know, like, man, why weren't you born later? You know, you could have been great in the 60s and 70s.
But you might ask this question, is that would the 60s and 70s have happened without people like George McLeod who laid the groundwork in earlier times?
But I mean, that's what everything you read is just,
Yeah,
he wasn't materialistic.
no, but somebody has to always begin that process for the next person to then take it to the next step. Right? Oh, if he can think that far, I can take it more. And he began some of those things that today we get to, in some ways, take for granted because he did that work. But we get to take for granted at least that it's not an overlooked issue. It's not a solved issue all the time. Violence is definitely not solved. But because some people like him stood up and said, violence is not where I'm going, we have an easier time of saying that today than what he did.
I liked on page 197.
Yes.
He says, it uses the word Christ. He is pointing out, he is pointing not just to the historical figure of Jesus Christ, but to the conjoining of heaven and earth, divine and the human spirit and matter. And I remember hearing a sermon years ago that the symbol of the cross is the earth and the heaven coming down in that junction, so that the symbol of the cross becomes more than just where Jesus died, but it becomes where he began, sort of for us.
The place where he lived.
The divine and the earth, the whole idea of spirit and matter, heaven and earth, human and divine is really important for me to think about. And then also on 201.
Wait, let's let me respond to that first.
I'm just thinking, thank you for saying that, so I can think of it in a different
Yeah.
way.
Okay.
Because the cross is so often been used in a way that isn't accessible to all of us easily, or that we have desire to access it the way that we find it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a way that we can,
That's why the Celtic cross is.
Yeah.
Instead of. Well, disproportionately taller. They're two pieces are even.
yeah, even the real tall cross is the central part of that cross has equal arms.
Why is the circle there in the Celtic cross?
That is, I think that's the, oh, what is it, that's the circumference of nature of life,
Never ending.
the never ending.
Sort of to the future.
I think it also doesn't use the.
Good bit.
It's just like Nancy was saying, the one thing I underlined here, which is the very last few words there, which is to be looked for everywhere and in everyone.
Yes. That's like.
That one. Yeah, I underlined that down, because it's like, okay,
Wait, I thought it's almost every.
it's on you then.
That would be easier, wouldn't it? We could at least write down a couple of them.
Yeah.
But I mean, you just look at that and what that says. You know.
Well, and I like to think, what am I getting out of this class or any class that I take or any book or sermon or whatever? And what I come away with is, like John Word, the other guys, is like, to see the sacredness and everything, to see, not, it's easy to look up at the stars and think, oh, you know, heavenly beauty, but to look at the rocks and that they're just as sacred,
And
you
wonders.
know, and
Wonders.
wondersome. So that is definitely one thing, but then to look, for the glory of God, if that's a different term for sacred, I don't know, but it is a way, and then to divine and human. Just sort of this earth that we're inhabiting now, and then what's the next way we'll be inhabiting? I don't. Does that make sense?
The struggle is always this. There's a reason why we write a lot of theologies really like the personhood of Jesus. And install in Jesus the human divinity of God. And that's because that's a relatively controllable entity, as opposed to spirit, which is not even touchable, right? It's ineffable. Or Father, which is above everything and beyond everything. And I don't want to say that there's not power in the image of Jesus. It's just a controllable power, unlike the others. And so I think people like that because it's more controllable than the rest of the image. And the same thing with, it's only out there somewhere that's relatively finite. And earth and all the things there and everything that's there is not as controllable.
I you think that some of this is for that song. I don't know if y'all sing it, but it's one that we sing. It's, I see the light of God in you.
That's right.
And I mean, that's why I wondered, you know, from this, reading this chapter, is that for that song, you know?
That type of theology is exactly right, because very often, what has been our theology? Well, maybe if we get baptized, then I'll be able to see that God is present with you. But to sing that before all that God is already present, that the divine lives in and through everything around us, is very different than some of the mainstream conceptions of the divine human relationship. Just this week, I was on Facebook, discussing with some of my pastor friends, right? And they wanted to be able to say, here's the doctrine as it's contained in the Bible. And I said, almost everything you listed right there is post-biblical. Somebody thought that up and people just, refined it after the Bible. And I'm not saying you can't take that out of the Bible, but there's a lot of other things that you can take out of that same book that doesn't have to be defined by this set of doctrines, this viewpoint. And yet that's what we do, is we turn things into something that defines the immenseness down to a manageable size, controllable size.
Well, how many people in all sit there and went through the Bible, because all the Bible is man's interpretation. You know, and you have got so many different people. I wonder how many people did it take to interpret our Bible?
For the Jewish Old Testament, there's commentary from commentary from commentary.
That's right.
To this day, people are still commentating on
I mean,
5,000 to
you know,
6,000-year-old laws.
I will say, yeah, well, but I will say though, that
Yeah, sure.
I will say though, that I think the Jewish tradition has a better relationship to it than much of the Christian tradition, because the Christian tradition sets it in stone and says no more arguing about it. The Jewish tradition, while they're still arguing, what they're trying to do is they honor that it doesn't have a final say, that you can add to, as long as you don't change the essence. of
And
it.
you know, Orthodoxy has a different interpretation than conservative and reform.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is that there's, I like the Jewish tradition of being able to expand much better than what we've done. Specifically in Western culture, where we really defined it way too, this is all there is, this is the end of, you don't have to think about that anymore.
No, there's more balance, that the whole concept of having two forces and finding the balance as opposed to, which will change, I mean, changes as opposed to, okay, it's gonna be here and it's gonna stay here and it's never gonna move.
So for example, one of the things that my friend on Facebook was doing was talking about sin. Sin means, and for me, sin doesn't mean anything like that. Right? And I'm okay with him needing that for himself, but not to inflict it on me. That's not a helpful concept for me. Let me be able to have something that's different. And in much of Orthodox Christianity, we have not always been able to do that. We decided on orthodoxy and don't escape from it.
You know, the same thing, what you're talking about here can be said from the Bible, in medicine.
Is what?
In medicine, how many years ago, they doing acupuncture? And a doctor introduced me to it over 50 years ago.
But that's often been written off as not true medicine, not right medicine, not
Exactly, it's
correct.
because.
Yeah.
Prescribing pills, and if you've got an alternative way, I say go for it. Instead of a pill, you know, something else will heal you, you know. But a doctor introduced me to it, and I love having acupuncture. It helps you.
Yeah, it's good. I agree with you. So I don't know, it worked.
But I was struck about by the dichotomy in his life, having been raised privileged and in the military, and an officer and all the ribbons and stuff. And you know, if there was ever a picture of conversion, it was how that changed around him.
Yeah, the story of him on in that transport.
Right, and it's like, and the pictures I've seen of him were always, they kind of had that military bearing. You know, he was maybe not pompous, but the fact that he had these 3 catchphrases that he said over and over, made me laugh because I thought he could have been a first grade teacher. Well, one of them was Matter Matters.
Yeah.
One of them was, are you a Christian or a Presbyterian?
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the other one.
I remember.
What was the purpose of him?
You believe in non-bias.
And that went along with one of the other.
Yeah, you know, that's what I was reading that, and it was because of his background. He was privileged and had so much, and he, you know, thought, I've got to see what see what it's like, you know, for the other people that church didn't have anything.
I think the challenge is always this, and I think that this is where he was dealing. Privilege often gives you the appearance of ultimate answers. I have enough wealth, I have enough stuff, I have enough resources that I don't have to think any further. And the war, I think, convinced him that he didn't have enough answers. That's what that came down to, is that all of this that has been my privilege, my resource, is not going to solve this issue. So where do I keep searching? And stuff of privilege too easily puts a cap on it. Education can do the same thing. I already know enough, I don't have to learn anything else. Religion can do the same thing. We have the right doctrines, we don't have to keep searching for it. And at least part of my definition of God, and I think he would agree with me, is that it expands further than whatever small definition we already have. It's more than that we already have, and so we have to keep looking, searching, being open to. Can it be found in a rock as well as in a flower?
Well, the issue with privilege for me is that they also has the overtone of deserving.
Yeah,
I have these things because I deserve them. And it's not the way it is.
and especially like in the English system where it's passed down and it's inherited wealth. Why do you deserve it more than the person who was born in the basement of your castle? Well, why are you more deserving of it? That's just a class thing.
But wasn't that translated into closer to God?
Oftentimes. But that's because who gets to define closer to God in a privileged society, right? The one who has more control over books and education and writing, and so they define it that way, which tells their story well at the expense usually of someone else's story.
That's going on today.
That's
Yeah.
going on. I
You know,
think
in the educational field, that's exactly what's going on today.
Get rid of those books.
Yeah, banning books, yeah, of course.
And it often happens in it. I mean, America is publishing a whole lot of books. And so we get to decide what the world looks like in a very real way. And maybe we're saying it right, but maybe we're not. Does that make
Depends
sense?
on who's saying what.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We get to
Look at
define
who's saying
it,
what.
where somebody in the rainforest of Peru where I go, they don't get as much control over how things are said in the world. They don't have a readership.
It's deciding the curriculum at school.
Who's deciding curriculum?
Are we the history of this or just ignore certain
That's right.
things?
It wasn't, if the Buddha that was raised in privilege, and then he went outside, and was like, oh my gosh, Saint Francis too, yeah, like over old people, like people that are dying.
Yep.
And I think he also ends up saying, love the broken.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to us, and what does it mean to be broken?
And the real question is, what should be the correct stance of someone who is trying to be the best type of person in the world? One of privilege, or one that looks at the broken? And one that says, how do I solve stuff of the world? I mean, I think that if you're saying God is somehow speaking in and through your life, then there's got to be a certain amount of where you've got to be able to look like God. And does God esteem class? Does God esteem wealth? Does God esteem power? Is that what we believe in? But yeah, much of our theology has said that.
Because maybe people were making God up in their own image.
Which often happens, usually happens too much. Yeah.
But look at Mother Teresa, you know,
You step
Yeah, she
completely away.
she's one who loved the broken.
Uh-huh.
And really did such wonderful things with her life and created so much, to help others.
But it's the ongoing issue though. As spiritual people, we should be looking to better the world, not better my position. in the world. And much of our life says better my position, and not all of that is necessarily bad. It's good for me to get an education. But it's why? So that I make more money and I get more stuff, or so that I do something better in the world. The same action, getting an education, can be either, I think, a positive or a relative negative. And it's really hard because. At least part of your motivation about getting education and about getting a good job, and about earning more money, is so that you can take care of the ones closest to you. It's not wrong to take care of the ones closest to you. But is that done in a way that's more fair to you than it is to somebody else? Is it at somebody else's expense or relative expense? And do you consume more than enough at the expense of someone else?
I just read an article about, I think it's the Swedish concept or the Finnish
Is
concept.
that on the internet? Cause
Of,
I've had
yes,
the same
yes,
thing.
of log something.
Yeah,
or other.
right, what is enough?
And exactly,
Yeah,
yes,
but
yes,
it's
it
enough.
was Finland, and,
Yeah.
and their whole idea is, you know, do you have enough? Are you taking away from somebody else?
Mhm.
And I really like it.
I think frankly, that's one of, I think, what should be a central spiritual question. What is enough? And can I hold, and my enough doesn't have to be your enough, but each of us has to define what is that which satisfies the soul, and how do I give away that which is more than?
But Jim, I mean, you're brought up, you work, you make money, be successful. That's the key, you know, those are the key words, to be successful. Well, if someone else doesn't go to college, they go to vocational school, as long as they work, they're productive in life, they've got their home, you know, everything else, to me, that's all that's matters. I'm not materialistic like so many people are, and it's like, you can't take that with you when you go. Why do you have to be like that right now? If you can share and try to make life a little bit easier for somebody, I think that's what we're supposed to do.
Makes you feel good.
Yeah.
I mean, to give, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I
Well,
think,
we're living in a capitalist society. That has a lot to do with it too. Isn't society that you live under,
That's right.
whether it's socialist or capitalist, or communist or whatever, that's going to dictate a lot of what goes on.
That's right.
The values.
Because much of our ways of viewing life is seen through that system that says whatever it says. And essentially what McLeod is trying to do is put us into a different system than just what he was born into, a rank and privilege power, and say that there's something else that's more important. So in the religious world, we also have systems that tell us certain stories, certain ways of how God and human interact. And his thing is much broader and deeper than that. That it's not a singular source of right, but that it's a broad-based way that right is encountered. And that you can find that God not just in the church. I love the quote about that God is not found just in the, that Jesus was not crucified between the candlesticks, right, but between the thieves. That it's not just in that holy space that we've decided that the cross is where holiness is found, but in a lot of other places in the world, in life, in the muck and mire is one of my favorite places about that. That's where God lives. But we write that off often because that doesn't feel like a good God. That's kind of a small, cheap, not sanitary, not powerful, not, you know.
But you know, that's where the lotus grows, the muck and mire, and then it blooms on its top.
Yeah.
But back to that, what is enough? And I think you think of things, and then sometimes it's like, what is enough compassion? What is enough money to give away? So, you know, flipping it around a little bit, and I don't know that I have an answer for that. I was like, okay, I give a certain amount every Sunday, but is that enough? And then how, where I don't have an answer, there's no answer key to that.
And here's the thing, mine enough may not be your enough, and we don't want to necessarily codify one person's enough versus another person's enough, right? we have to get leeway for each person to discover what is enough, not try to force it on someone else. Because that person has to figure out what is enough, because in the figuring out, then they come to enough in a very different way than if I say, this is it.
And you have no idea, because you don't know what the resources are,
That's right.
so.
We have
I
no
have
idea.
nothing
So
here to say anything.
I'm just talking about me, I'm not talking about anybody else.
No, I figured you were just kidding, like, I saw what's enough.
You know, how much do I get?
Oh, you go.
I'm taking it into.
So Tom Shadyac. I want you to watch a movie if you get a chance. Tom Shadyac did a movie. Tom Shadyac is, you know his movies, whether you know his name or not. He did all the Jim Carrey movies. He did lots of the comedies of the 90s and early 2000s. He did things like Liar Liar and the Noah movie. Remember, he was the director of all those. So he was going up and up the corporate ladder, right? And the way he epitomized that is the bigger and bigger houses that he got. And he says he remembers walking in to this new house that he bought, sweeping staircases going up, and saying, okay, am I happy?
Yeah.
And he realized that the answer was no, that more was more than his enough. So the movie is about how he struggled through finding what was his enough. And what did he have to let go of? And how did he have to go against the corporate ladder of Hollywood, which says get more and more, get bigger and bigger, and find his enough. And then let go of the rest to something. You know what? Who else needs it? And I think that's the type of thing that we have to do on a regular basis, is figure out how to get to the right spot for us. What's funny about this movie is that by the end of the movie, instead of seeing him in these great big huge houses, he's in a very well appointed, but it's just a double white trailer. And that was his enough.
We had a program like that on NPR, I think this last week, earlier this week, about somebody just getting everything away except for what they need every day and what they can survive on, and they said everything else we just don't need.
Yeah.
That's the name of that program, I should have written it.
The name of this movie is called I Am. You would like to watch it, guess who has it? I do, as a matter of fact. So you'd like to, I mean, it's that type of movie I think we have to reteach ourselves about. And I think that's part of the George's Bob is talking about. I am. But I am. It's a great movie because it asks us to change our mind about how we view people. And I think that's what George McCloud is trying to do too. Is meaning, purpose, God found in the war to be the most powerful, in money to have the most control over it, or is there something else that brings all of that? And usually all that's found in places like between the candlesticks, right? Instead of in the rocks, in the plants. This is a whole other place to be able to search for it. Go ahead.
I'm just waiting for
Go ahead. Tell us what you think.
So when I was beginning seminary, we're going back ways. Late 80s. We were just in as progressive Christianity was kind of being birthed at that time, right? So we were really looking at that confirmation and affirmation of matter matters. Like that really started to take a foothold. So for me, that I'm going to jump back to Tillyard. He was one of the first theologians to say clearly who you are as a body. This is important. What you're doing here is important. That really took hold in theological circles in the late 80s and early 90s. And that really influenced my own ministry. We'll talk about all that tomorrow. But so I went on to do, I had an LGBTQ dance company that was all about the embodiment of Christ. How do you embody that? We toured for a couple of years. Anyway,
And some of that was based on people like Tilliard. So with McLeod, though, we see a shift in the language, so we see the shift, in that, in him really clarifying that this matters. But also, we see this, the emergence of this idea of social justice. And all of those things are embodied in the Celtic way. So, you know, what we do on Thursday night is about how do you practice this stuff? So we see the emergence in McLeod as the first one to really say, this matters, matters, and social justice matters also. And I don't think that earlier Celts or people following the Celtic way weren't embodying that. So there was a shift in our consciousness to go, oh, we now need to think about this. There's so much body shaming. So again, Tilliard was very, very influenced of the first body positive, right? And then we have McLeod come in and he's saying that and social justice. And then here's the thing that I thought was really relevant. And so when I'm reading the book, I'm not really reading it, and I'm reading it to go over what practices are we gonna play with in a moment. But I really love this part of him, so I'm not quoting him. But the gist was, in order to be a mystic, so again, in that era, theologically, we started to have a re-love of the mystics, right? Like, who were these people? And
Because we've written off mystics a lot in Western theology.
Right.
Theological.
right, so Matt Fox, the one person who's looked at that, Matt Fox is great. He's like, he dives into them one at a time. He's still doing it. I like his work a lot. But McLeod is interesting because he says, in order to be a mystic, it must be incorporated. Your mystical being must be incorporated in your daily affairs and also lead you into social justice. That's how I interpret it. And I think that was really revolutionary for that period of time, for him to be saying that. Another reason why his probably shut down.
And it's because mysticism has often been the go hide away somewhere, go run away from, and it's always been my take that true mysticism can't be just off in a corner by yourself.
But also, I think that is an interpretation of the West at a certain juncture, because if you really look at the mystics, they didn't do that.
Right? Should
They did study them, they did not do that. It was kind of interesting, so there's this kind of weird shunning of mysticism, I think.
Yeah. But that's why I loved the chapter on Brigid, where she said, okay, we run as happy, that is like the center of town, the taking care of town, the helping of it. It's really important to this community, not separate from, we're not hiding away from. And I think that that's a much better model of the monastic mystic than what we sometimes have seen.
Right.
Right? Which is often based on words like keep yourself unsullied from the world.
Jeez.
Right? Separate from.
So when we saw that Friday.
Oh, that, come walk with me, or I don't know, I wasn't here this Friday, you're talking about.
No, they were here because we were talking about that, and I said, it was very easy for them to just move away from the world and go into their own monastery. And, not be involved with what was going on in the world.
Are you talking about the Thich Nhat Hanh?
Yeah, right, I was.
Well,
Yeah,
actually,
I
they don't do that. I mean, they live in a village, but they're out doing social work.
Are they, I didn't do
I
that.
have not heard of that. Why we have to live at home? Did not know.
Yeah, they're out in the Mar social workers
Mm,
out
okay,
doing that work.
because it didn't really show that, and I didn't see that in the film, but, okay.
It's near the end.
It's the other thing that's interesting about sometimes in the monastic life is the other way that it gets defined is you have to be the beggar, that you don't get to have your own source of income, you have to live on whatever someone else gives you. I'm not certain that that's what this is meaning, right? It's not that type of experience in the world. Is you can go and be all these things, but that you are expected to do something with it besides just yourself.
But that's,
Oh, no, but we romanticize.
We do.
We so romanticize and it's. Yeah, working with poor people and I think it's convenient. For people who are not so inclined to sort of write it off that, well, these people are doing it because. Of love in their heart, well, yeah, but I mean, we don't have the corner on the market, you know, I mean, if you know,
Well,
so
but we love-
it's like
but we love that, like,
optimizing it, and then it gives them a reason to sort of shun from it, it's kind of interesting.
It's really easy.
So implied in his question, do you believe in nonviolence are you willing to work for social justice?
Yeah.
That the two things can't be separated.
And that very question, just to put up a question that so goes against the mainstream thought of the day. Right, in America, we spend more than half of our federal budget on military things.
You know, I'm thinking of Central America.
Yeah.
And South America, and when Paulo Freire was doing his pedagogy of the oppressed. I mean, this was happening in, I guess, different parts of the world. And it was partly to help gather people against this sort of military.
Yeah, the more dollars put on protecting ourselves, making ourselves powerful, isn't the right thrust of what we should be doing as human beings. That there's something else.
What waste of resources?
But it's so embedded in us. Right, we've had since, you know. US military budget man, right? We were down here, this piece of bottom line, until World War II. And our buildup at World War II, huge buildup, right? Gave us permission to not come anywhere close to that again. We've never been down at a normal level since that buildup, and we became one of the powers of the world. And now we continue to spend at such a rate, rather than back to what we should have come back to.
I think it's a lot of fear of what other countries are doing, and basically what they're putting their money into is armaments and military. You take a look around the world now. You know, I'm not a pacifist personally, but I don't really have the answer. I really don't, because you do have to protect yourself, but I think we've gone way over the top, way over. I mean, it's criminal what we're doing here.
Yeah. But we protect others, it's the way we justify. Oh, we're protecting the world, well, are we?
Oh, no.
Are we really?
Other countries, the way we.
Oh, we've invaded and committed all kinds of atrocities around the world. And then what we committed right on this continent right here, 500 years. Yeah,
But what that all takes is a very real commitment that's very different than what we have historically always done. Military, like in George McLeod's family, was the way that men did things. They went and they spent the time and they became the military person. And that was part of what was expected and part of the way that they got prestige. What if that's not, you know, at least part of the is it north-south split in more or less in American Methodism right now. And part of that split is the South holding on to more of a traditional military glorification of that image, and others not holding on to it. I see you.
Yeah. Just want to toss out another point of view. I'm a Naval Academy grad, and I retired from the Navy, through the reserves, and some of the best leaders that we have that gone through the academies.
Yeah.
So I just
No,
there's a train.
We know you're not trained killers.
Well,
Exactly.
that's not exactly not true.
Well, that's not all.
The military is.
So there's more to it than just what you're saying.
Right, I don't mind military. I mind the huge investment, over the top investment that I think we've made. I don't know what the right amount is, 10% of our budget, 25% of our budget, I just know that way over 50% is at the expense of a whole lot of other things.
Yeah, I'm not arguing.
That makes sense.
Just the flavor here was sounding very, very anti-military. You could do away with it, it's a bunch of crap, but there are some things about it
Right.
that I have experienced, and I know that it's not, nothing's ever black and white,
No, it's not.
nothing is.
I think the hard part is always this.
Great.
I think somebody who's in the military, at least part of your job is the same thing that the first grade teacher is. Your job is to teach your kid well enough to get them out of your grade, so that you don't have a job anymore. Part of military is to promote and come to spaces of peace, which means that you don't have a job the way you have, you know, and that's a hard thing for any of us to do, and so we way too easily discover ways to perpetuate rather than solve, if that makes sense.
Sort of a new way, you know, different approaches.
So thank you for that. When I speak anti-military, anti-violent, I don't know what the right level is. There is a level of it that's, in my mind, way below where we're at.
I'm not gonna argue that, I think that anytime you just say that this is the only way, you're missing something. So I never do that, I never
Yeah.
say this is the only way about anything.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm always looking for whatever the other side is, so I can understand it, right? Because you can, if you don't understand it, understand, like what I was saying, right? You can understand where the other people are coming from.
That's right, that's right.
And if you don't, then you're shutting off, you know, you're not gonna make good decisions.
Right. And you're not gonna make good relationships, at least with part of the people in there.
But I mean, McLeod was
There's a pacifist.
totally, yeah.
Yeah, right, I totally enough, I mean, it's, I feel at times, in order to protect yourself and protect your environment, you are gonna be forced into doing things you don't want to do. It's happened throughout all kinds, through the centuries. Not everybody who went to war really wanted to go to war, but what is the alternative? We're facing that right now today, it's the same issues that have always been faced.
Right, and there's good and bad reasons why that's there. You can say that part of it is because of whatever they're doing. But it's also because of what we're not doing. For example, if all we're doing is building a military force and not building a diplomatic corps. Right, then the only tool we have in our toolbox is this, and so of course that's what we look to. But if we also have this in our toolbox, maybe we solve some of these things this way rather than that way. And I think we very easily overemphasize one thing over the thing. But every teacher will tell you that one of the challenges is, how do you talk to a kid who's mad at another kid and say, what can you do instead of swinging your fist right now?
Use your words.
Right?
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how to do that is a difficult thing, right? Because sometimes it sure feels like, you know, I remember Mike Burkle picking on me in 8th grade and I shoved him back and that stopped his bullying. Was it the only solution? I don't know, it worked in the moment. We don't know sometimes what are the things that stop another person from doing whatever the aggression is that they're doing, what stops the violence of them. Is it sometimes that I have to speak in the same language? Maybe sometimes.
Yeah, maybe sometimes you do. Maybe, I mean. You know, take a look at different circumstances or history.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the only answer.
Yeah. But that's the type of thing that I think he's dealing with. He's sitting in World War II. You know, that in many ways we saw that as the most righteous war that we've ever fought, is we stop these great aggressors. And he said, I choose to build island instead. A way of being able to foster something different than what was being fostered in that moment. I don't know if that's a better or worse answer, but it's a different answer that I hope is saying, there's this tool, but here's this tool as well. So,
I found it fascinating that when he was talking about the bombing of Hiroshima and it happening on the day of transformation, that's really deep for me personally. Yeah.
Why?
Because we are intertwined, you know, I mean, exactly what he's talking about, you know, it's. One is a microcosm, you know, down to ultimately the atom and energy. And so, man, you know, I mean, I'm a big one for metaphors, and I feel like there's all these metaphors about what are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to each other? What are we doing to the earth? And it's like, wake up. Because it's so interconnected. And I believe in synchronicity. Yeah, I mean, it's just a web.
in the same way that, because I believe in that web. And so for me, a lot of it has to do with what is vision that we're looking out at. So that, am I seeing more in this moment the threat of you? The violence you did, the whatever it is that's standing against me? Or can I see something more than just that? And if I only see just the threat, I react a certain way. And it's not an inappropriate thing because of the threat that you are, but is it the broadest and best way to view each other? I don't know. And I think that's what he's trying to draw us towards.
You know, there's a group at the university, there's actually a Department of Compassion Studies. And they've been doing all this research and they actually are doing training. I was listening to one of their talks and they were saying if we could train these people and then the effect that would have on these many people. And they figured they could train every Tucsonan in compassion, like within 6 months. And their whole thing with compassion is similar to what McLeod was talking about of action. It's all great to feel, but bring it to action.
Yeah.
Stanford also has a full department of compassion. It's Odie is his name. I read his book, which is fantastic. I think it's called Magic Toss, but anyway, it's on YouTube, and if you just look up Stanford Compassion. But it's and he does interviews with like Thich Nhat Hanh, he does interviews with all these different leaders in all different areas around the world stuff, and it's fascinating.
What's his name? What's his name?
Stanford University.
Oh, it's, yeah, his name is, I know his last name is Doty, D-O-T-Y. His first name, I want to say Scott, but I'm not positive. But
What was the name of the book?
Magic, I think it's. I have to look it up. It's
Well, we have
something
the
like Magic Powers. Because he learned about meditation and different things from this, when he was a little boy, from this woman, that he went to a magic shop. And as a little boy, he taught her. She taught him, because he was from a very violent, chaotic childhood stuff, and she taught him how to meditate, how to go within himself. And he became this great neurosurgeon and made tons of money, and then discovered that was making him miserable, that he had forgotten her lessons. But the book
It's,
We'll find it.
I have to look it up.
Yeah,
His
look it
last name is Doty, D-O-T.
Look at it, see if you can bring it tomorrow. That would be great.
Cause it's a big, it's what, I mean, the book just absolutely. I'll see if I can find it.
At least part of what I think Cloud is calling us to, or maybe what he's calling us away from, is what distracts us. Right? And things like chase after money, or. Okay,
Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain. And his name is James R. Doty, MD. And I cannot recommend that book out. Say it again. And Into the Magic Shop. And it is a book that will absolutely draw you in and just.
His name again.
Doty, D-O-T-Y.
James Doty, D-O-T-Y.
I mean, one of the nice things about America is that in our lifetime, we've had relative ease, relative ability to be able to look broader than most people are able to look, right? And that we haven't been limited by have to earn a certain amount of money. We've got the resources, we've been able to do things. And so we're doing some wonderfully expanding type of stuff that could draw us beyond some of the old paradigms. The question is, what do we have to set aside? What paradigms are blinding us towards moving in whatever that new way is? Right? And it's no different than Mike Verbal standing over top of me in the grade. He distracts me from what is my best self. He gives me one choice that's really easy versus one of the others. Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we're all in that same type of space. I think as a nation, we've been able to do some marvelous work. Right? What we've looked at and how we know Eastern thought better than what our parents did. Just a few decades ago. And way beyond what our grandparents was ever thought about. We're able to look at all that, not because it's better or worse, but that it expands us. And it allows us to see something different. And I think that McLeod, he helped just begin the conversation that now we're dealing with better than we ever have. And when he spoke that, there weren't very many who were able to even begin to listen to him. That their world wouldn't let them. But today we're able to listen in different ways. We're able to say, is there a way for us to be less committed to violence than what we have been before?
Things too that I look at the history of this country. Now we're talking about the military industrial complex, which is a whole different thing than just the military. And then there used to be a thing called compassionate Republicans. They were. Yes, it's bullshit. Anyway.
But there really were Republicans who believed in social justice.
Please. Okay, and the thing is, we used to have socialism. Now, if you have a safety net, it's a socialist society. And that's a huge bad name right now. If you're, it's like, just to have there's so many, and I'll get real personal for a minute. I'm looking for a place to live. Let me tell you something. It's a scary world out there. I'm this close to being homeless. And we don't have, there's so many evictions happening right now. There's so many people who are being homeless right now. And we don't have anything in our infrastructure to help with any of this. They're not building affordable housing. They're buying apartments that are like from our senior apartments and they're doubling rents, literally. It's like,
It's a crisis.
well, I'm terrified, quite honestly, yeah.
It is.
But it's part of the reason why, do you remember, Simmons, who used to be our facilities manager, when he came and spoke to us a few months ago? Why he's doing what he's doing in upstate New York. Essentially buying different lots, different houses up there where he lives, to be able to make a purposeful choice to give affordable housing to those who want him. And I think we have to decide, are there things like that that the rest of us can do? Is there something where we can support movements here in Tucson to do that same type of thing?
Where I volunteer, twice a week, I was gonna give you the resources. Yeah, yeah, afterwards, I'll, I want to talk to you.
I've got a bunch of stuff I'm doing, and I've got a piece.
Oh, you do, okay, I was gonna suggest that also.
I'm not trying to ask for anybody's problems, I'm just putting it out there. And Joyce has been driving me around Buster Park to look at places too, and some places it's like. I don't want to live here, it's like, do you want to be safe or do you want to be?
It's right, what they're charging.
It's a
is
scary
outrageous.
world.
It's
But
outrageous.
you know, the housing and, I mean, it really is a problem.
It's a-
And I worked with elderly in housing and what the government, what the government does is they allow real estate developers to build an apartment building with major tax deductions with the agreement that for 10 or 20 years, they will do low rents. After that, contract's over, we're gonna kick you out. This is what happened with Armory Park. They kicked everyone out. And they haven't replaced it. So it really is going
It's
to
a
be
real
a
crisis,
crisis.
and it's hiding in plain sight. I mean, I applied to low income to a couple of houses, literally, it's like a 3 to 5 year.
That's right.
Oh, section
If they're even taking applications.
They are taking.
It's,
I know they had stopped section eight.
it's, it-
But you know why that happens? And I tell you why that happens, it's the same reason why, okay, so for 14 years as a teacher, most of those years, probably 10 or 12 of those years, I did bargain. Right, in the two districts like that. And you know what came up every single year? Well, let's cut, not certified staff, not the teachers, not the principals, let's cut classified staff. Let's cut their salaries. Why? Because they can't buy faculty. There's not as many of them. They don't have as big of a voice in this thing. And that's the same thing we're talking about here. Who doesn't have a voice in our society? The poor, the uneducated, the ones that are people of color, elderly, don't have as much of a voice. And so they're an easy mark, if I can say it that way.
We keep football, but we cut band and art, and not everybody is a job. You know, and some people are good at other things, why do we have to cut from theirs?
Yeah.
There's my son's one.
But I guess all of this is going back to where we started. What is enough? And how do we start asking that question of our society, not just of us as individuals? Is unbridled capitalism that because you can make that money, that's an unqualified good? Because in some ways, that's the message in society. And how do we battle that space? I don't know.
It goes back, money can't buy love and happiness.
But we think, that, yeah.
I mean, some people want to see safety.
We continually try to make it through them. Sorry, you were gonna say.
Go ahead.
Please do.
How hilarious is it that McLeod thinks that, building this article with the home? Right, like. Yeah,
And that was a very interesting story that he told.
yes.
I didn't do it yourself.
the end of the chapter where John Philip Newell wrote an article, Cloud thought was his article.
Yeah, right,
Exactly.
exactly.
So
But,
like,
but at least part of our job is to take something like the cloud and embody those words in such a way that we become part of it. We can't become him completely, but we can become part of it. And we can do things today because his voice has been around long enough, because voices like his have been around long enough. We can ask different questions than what we're being asked in his era. And we can try to decide, what can we solve that he couldn't solve in the same way?
Look at the Beatitudes, and that was brought up in here. You know, it's just like, okay, people, that's a whole other sermon right there.
So I want to end with another one of his prayers. Give us grace in our changing day to stand by the temple that is the present church, the noisome temple, the sometimes scandalized temple that is the present church, listening to what seems mumbo jumbo. Make it our custom to go till the new outline of your body for our day becomes visible in our midst. What is the new outline of the body of God here? Where is it moving? How can it be defined in a different way than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago? What do we do?
God is evolving as we are as well.
Yeah, which really is really obnoxious for some people to think that God is evolving. Right? That is really nothing else, our view of God, it should evolve. If we have God back in the 17th century or 12th century or 1st century model, then we're not being honest what has happened in those years since. How are we growing? And I think he's a really good example of that. He's asking questions that his predecessors couldn't answer this. I couldn't have even asked this, he said. And we get to answer them even better than what we did. Thank you for your time. We'll be here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And just by the way, did everyone make sure that they told Char that I did a much better job than her last week?
I got phone call.
So it's good to have Char back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have one more week.
We have one more week. Next week, the chapters for next week are right.
Oh,
over
good.
there. You need one? All right.